implement and integrate into our day-to-day life that will help us free our minds. To begin the conversation, family, if you would please comment below, free your mind. That is our objective. Free your mind. We don't want to be held bondage by fear, by doubt. We don't want to be held bondage or incarcerated by anxiety. We don't want to worry ourselves to the point that we're ineffective and not producing the things that we're aiming to achieve in life. We want to free our minds. I think it's important for us to gain an understanding, family, on how overthinking can impact us on a conscious as well as a subconscious level, right? Overthinking is ultimately a form of fear that will leave you stuck and often remaining in the same place, right? It's almost like running on a treadmill, right? I love running to a certain degree, right? But I would prefer running outdoors because when you run outdoors, there's scenery, right? You get to run past different landmarks. You're going a certain amount of distance, and you can experience everything that life has to offer with the outdoors. But running on the treadmill is completely different, right? You can increase the pace and the intensity, but you will find yourself remaining in the same place, the same space, tired and exhausted, feeling, run down, so to speak, after you get off. Of course, you may get a workout in, but you're in the same place. And the same is true for overthinking, right? How many of us have ever battled with overthinking? Put a number 1 in the comments below, right? Where you found yourself ultimately overwhelmed by maybe fear and anxiety. Maybe you highly reflected, right? Or really just kept thinking about something that happened the day before, a conversation that took place, an interaction that took place, and you kept reflecting on every specific detail about that specific situation, right? Or ultimately, in some cases, maybe you find yourself second guessing yourself about decisions that you've made over and over again. You're like, did I make the right decision, right? And you're in this loophole of thoughts. Or in some cases, we find ourselves imagining the worst case scenario, the worst possible outcome, stressed out and overwhelmed about things that could be, or the what ifs, right? The potential outcomes that can happen if I take a step, if I pursue this goal, if I take the leap of faith, if I move towards this dream, if I step away from my normal territory, what will happen? Our mind will conjure up all these different scenarios. And we have to understand, family, that thinking too much can prevent you from doing extraordinary things, right? I don't believe there's a problem with thinking, right? I'm a big believer in ultimately taking calculated steps, preparing yourself in the best possible way. But when it becomes a challenge for us is when thinking prevents us from taking action. Let me break that down on how this operates, right? Overthinking ultimately creates confusion. And confusion is the enemy of execution. So if I'm constantly overthinking scenarios, ultimately, I'm not operating with the level of execution that is necessary for me to achieve any extraordinary goal. With this understanding, right, it's very important for us to break this habit, right? This is talking about the conversation on pursuing goals and dreams. We haven't even addressed your personal peace, your mental clarity, right? On how that is robbed from us when we're overthinking things in our minds, things that may go down, things that may happen, things that may fall short, how our mission may be a failure, or us taking a step may lead to something, dramatic, or something, catastrophic, so to speak, haunting us. And in many cases, we're losing sleep, not getting proper rest. And this begins to impact us on a larger scale. Overthinking, family, again, is a form of fear that will leave you stuck and remaining in the same place. But here's what we need to understand. Here's what's going to lead us to some solutions. Comment below. It's a pattern. D1, what do you mean it's a pattern? I'm glad you asked, Juan. Overthinking is ultimately a pattern. And let's keep in mind, any pattern that we have has been learned. And since it has been learned, ultimately, it can also be unlearned, right? I'm a big believer, family, in learning new things, acquiring information, developing new skills. I'm a big believer in learning. But what often makes massive shifts in our lives is when we begin to unlearn the things that have been stunning our growth and preventing us from making progress. And overthinking is a pattern that we have grown accustomed to because it's a learned behavior, right? In many cases, we don't have time to break down to it. You become addicted to the fear and the emotions of worry on a subconscious level. Like for many of us, everything can be going right. You may be getting the green light to every opportunity, but because you've grown so accustomed to overthinking, you're pinpointing and searching for things that may be wrong in a situation. And you find things that weren't necessarily there, and you convince yourself, no, it's not as good as it seems, because you've grown accustomed to that pattern, because you've learned that behavior. But again, since you've learned it, we can unlearn it. We can reinvent how we show up. Now, what I want to break down are a few things, a few techniques, a few steps that we can begin to take that will help us break this pattern. We're going to kind of skim through them because of the essence of time, but ultimately you'll get the gist of what we're going to be discussing during today's conversation. First and foremost, the first thing that we need to begin to do in order for us to break this pattern of overthinking is recognize when you are stuck in your head. Comment below, recognize. Recognize. Again, I want us to participate in this conversation. Studies have proven as you participate in your learning, you'll begin to acquire the information more effectively, right? It will begin to resonate within your mindset subconsciously on a greater level because you're participating in the actual discussion. But again, comment below, recognize. Recognize when you are stuck in your head. Overthinking can often become such a habit that we don't even notice that we're doing it. Again, we've grown so accustomed to it. What will benefit us is us paying more attention, being more intentional about what we're thinking and the emotional states that we are in, right? When you find yourself, family, replaying scenarios in your mind, overthinking circumstances and situations, looking at your life and being overwhelmed by the fear of tomorrow or the anxiety of the future, and places that you haven't even entered into, you have to disrupt that pattern. Comment below, disrupt the pattern. And acknowledge in that moment, hold on, D1, this is not productive for me. This is not productive. Last time I checked, I'm speaking from personal experience. Nothing productive ever came from me overwhelming myself by fear and anxiety. Nothing, right? Overthinking a situation never helped me make progress towards my goals and my dreams. Because again, it overwhelmed me to the point that I was confused. And then again, confusion is the enemy of execution. So for many of us, you got the gifts, you got the talents, you have the skills, you have the knowledge, you even have the experience, but your mind is getting in your way. And you find yourself overthinking these situations. What's going to help us break this pattern is to acknowledge, hold on, this is unproductive. I've got to stop right here. Then it's going to lead us to the second phase, family. Not only should we acknowledge and recognize that we're stuck in our head, but number two, now we want to be solution oriented. And what's going to help us become solution oriented is to decide what you can control. Let me say that again. Decide what you can control. In fact, comment below that statement. Decide what you can control. How much stress do we bring on to ourselves by trying to control each and every single aspect about our lives? Things that we can't control at all, right? Like we're trying to control the economy. We want to control our spouse. We want to control our children. We want to control our boss, our colleagues, our teammates. We want to control every aspect of our lives. Simply because when we are lacking control, lack of control often brings forth uncertainty, maybe an unfamiliar territory, which makes us uncomfortable. And anytime we find ourselves in a state of discomfort, we're always looking to remove ourselves from that position. And where we find comfort is trying to control everything. But we have to understand it's this need, it's this want to control everything that's creating the anxiety. You're replaying all these scenarios in your mind because you want to be the ultimate creator. You want to control every aspect, and that's not the way life works. What makes us effective is directing that attention towards everything that we can control, right? Remove yourself from the things that you cannot control, and you have to distinguish the difference between the two of those. But granted, it's important for us to understand that in most situations, you can really only control ultimately the energy that you bring to any given experience, right? And the effort that you apply towards the goal that you're working to accomplish. Like the attitude that you have, you're always in control of that. Your perspective, you're always in control of that. And you're always in control of the level of effort that you apply to any given situation. With that understanding, here's a solution for us. When you find yourself overthinking a situation or circumstance, decide what you can control. Identify what you have control over. And now that you identify what you can control, your strategy is, let me leverage this information to put myself in the best possible position to be successful in this outcome, to be successful in the scenario at hand, right? Then also, as you identify the things that you can't control, disconnect from it emotionally. But as you disconnect yourself from it emotionally, now you can come up with a game plan to cope with the situation if it unfolds the way that you may imagine, right? Ultimately, you're operating with the mindset that, hey, whatever happens, I can handle it. Whatever unfolds, I'm built for. If it's going to be uncomfortable, I can do hard things. I can figure this thing out. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to lose my precious rest because I'm overthinking this situation. I'm not going to put myself in this state of worry and anxiety because I'm trying to control something that I really cannot control. I'm going to direct that attention towards my mindset, my attitude, my perspective, and my effort towards what it is that I'm building. I'm going to prepare for my moment. So when it presents itself, I'm ready. I'm ready. I can handle the situation effectively. Decide what you can control. That's number 2. The number 3, family. We got the 4th one, then we'll wrap it up. Not only do we want to acknowledge when we are stuck in our mind, not only do we want to determine and decide what we can control, but number 3 is this. Comment below. You got to challenge your thoughts. Ooh, I wish we had time to break this down. In fact, we will be talking about this on Tuesday, tomorrow, in our MindFit community. I'll speak on that later on. But comment below, challenge your thoughts. You want to challenge your thoughts and think constructively, family. It's important for us to understand that your emotions will often interfere with your ability to look at a situation objectively. Don't allow your emotions to overpower your intelligence. And we've all been there. How many of us have ever experienced a moment of anger, right? Where somebody popped off and you were right there with them, right? Like you blew a fuse and you were angry, you were upset. And then a week later, you begin to reflect on the moment and you're like, man, it really wasn't even that deep. Why did I react in that scenario, that situation in the way that I did, right? It's because you allowed your emotions ultimately to take control over you. And your emotions were driven by a thought pattern that was taking place in that particular moment. How many of us, right? You expected something to unfold in some fashion and it intimidated you. You were afraid. You were afraid to take that initial step, but then you eventually took that step. And as you stepped into that element, you were like, man, this is not what I expected. Because again, your emotions can cloud your judgment in many cases. It makes it difficult to look at a subjective experience from an objective point of view. Man, I wish we had time to break this down, right? So with that being said, family, we have to understand that you cannot see the picture if you were in the frame. In many cases, you have to step away from the situation and begin to look at the situation for what it truly is, right? This is what I mean when I'm saying think about what we are thinking about, right? Begin to challenge those thoughts that make you feel anxious. Begin to challenge those thoughts that provoke or promote fear and anxiety within you. Question number 1 that you can ask yourself, right? As you're challenging these thoughts, what evidence do you have that this thought is true? What's the evidence? As you're overwhelmed and stressed out about a scenario, what evidence do I have that this will take place? Second question, What evidence do I have that this thought is not true, right? You keep saying you're going to fail or you can't handle the next level, but then you begin to reflect on how you've overcome things in your past. And you start recruiting confidence from your past overcoming situations, right? Or your past experiences. This only happens when you start thinking constructively and you start challenging these thoughts that make you feel some type of way. Then the third question that you can ask yourself, are there any alternative any alternative ways that I can look at the situation that is more helpful, more realistic, and more productive? In essence, your perspective may be the very thing that's creating this anxiety and causing you to overthink. But your perspective is your perspective. Somebody can look at the exact same situation and see something differently, right? But us thinking constructively and challenging these thoughts, we can place ourselves in a position where we gain a different perspective and see it from a different viewpoint. And if we learn to look at the things differently, now we can interact with them on a different level. You may not change your situation instantly, right? You've changed your mindset, and your mindset will empower you to change your situation for the better. But this only happens when we challenge our negative thoughts and begin to start the habit of thinking constructively. That's number 3. Number 4, then we'll take it home, family. Number 4, and I highly encourage us to make this a daily routine. Develop a mindfulness game plan, right? Develop a mindfulness game plan. Many of my clients, I remember having a conversation with one client. They said, D1, how can I stop these negative thoughts from haunting me? How can I stop them from entering into my mind? And I had to keep it real with them, right? I said, you have to understand these thoughts will not stop. They will keep coming. For many of us, we try to suppress thoughts, right? Like right now, if I told you, don't think about a red elephant, please do not think about a red elephant, Rick. Don't put that in your mind. Right now, you're picturing in your mind a red elephant. The more and more you try to resist the thought, the more and more is going to persist, right? If you're trying to suppress thoughts, ultimately, they're going to rise to the surface and try to haunt you consciously. So it's not about us running away from thoughts. It's about us changing our relationship with those thoughts. So now you may still think the same thoughts, but they no longer have the same influence over you, right? I can recall when I initially started speaking, I grew up quiet and reserved. I was terrified to speak in public. I was terrified to speak to one person on an individual level, let alone speaking in front of an audience of thousands of people. But as I began to reframe my mind, family, through different practices and routines, ultimately, the negative thoughts that would try to arise before I stepped on stage, they would still come, but they no longer had the same influence on me. And this is because of mindfulness practices like meditation, and we'll get to that in our MindFit community. I highly recommend y'all join in our MindFit community. We dive deeper on these topics, but meditation ultimately will help you become aware of what you are thinking, right? It's being aware, right? It's ultimately governing your consciousness. It's you having divine control over what thoughts you're allowing to influence you, what emotional states you're allowing to influence you in any given moment, right? But also some different things you could begin to do. Not only can you meditate, but you can also find a hobby, have a conversation with a great friend that will break the pattern of this overthinking. Step away from what's causing the anxiety. Step away from what's causing you to stay in this state of worry. You want to find healthy stress relievers, ultimately, that align you with the emotional state that you are aiming to experience in life. Now, keep in mind, this doesn't happen overnight. Mindfulness is a skill, but through patience, persistence, consistency, and daily practice, you can develop more skill in this particular area and gain more control over your ultimate mindset, right? The mentality that you are in any given situation. Now, we've talked about 4 different techniques, right? Number 1, acknowledge when you are stuck in your head. Number 2, decide and determine what you can control. Number 3, we also want to begin to challenge those thoughts and think constructively. And number 4, develop a mindfulness game plan, right? Finding things that help you get out of your head, right? Life isn't about us living in our head. It's about us living our life. That's what's most important. You want to step away from situations, right? And find things that help you stay in tune with the real you, help you connect with your personal power that's at work within. But ultimately, what I'm aiming to say in this conversation as it relates to overthinking is that this pattern can be broken. And to that one that's anxious about taking that step, to that one, you've got a goal, you have a dream that you want to pursue, but you keep overthinking it. To that one that's losing rest and sleep at night because you're haunted by your thoughts, right? Like you don't want to be alone with yourself because you find yourself going toe to toe in the war with your thoughts. I want you to understand you can break this pattern, right? I may not be able to stop every negative thought from coming into my mind. I may not be able to control every negative thought from creeping into my consciousness, but what I can do is this. I can stop those negative thoughts from controlling me. And the way that I do that, again, I got to acknowledge, hey, D1, you stuck in your head right now, man. Hey, you tripping. Like this scenario that you're picturing, it hasn't even unfolded. Like you're operating in a state of fear. And fear and faith, they operate the same way. The difference between the two of those is where you're directing your attention, right? Think about that for a moment, family. Fear, the way that it works, it creates pictures and scenarios in our mind. Those pictures seem intimidating. It causes us to have this emotional response from within. Your heart rate increases. You have more blood flow